thinks Canary's breach detection, not breach prevention. The reason we do this, all of these breaches and compromises happening fairly regularly. So it's a sort of a post-breach lateral movement detection devices. And the reason we're doing this, what's evident here is even folks with a strong security focus don't seem to know when these compromises are occurring. So, Twitter, NSA, etc. You can have a look at sort of those just images on the deck, and you'll find some supporting documentation out there as well, kind of supporting the claim, mentioning the same thing. Adversaries or attackers are often left on networks for months at a time before being detected, and that's the problem that we're addressing. We're reducing that attacker dwell time to as little as possible. Okay, if we just take a look at a typical breach, an attacker gains a foothold onto a network, they attempt to exfiltrate data or gain access to high-value targets, and they'll repeat this process moving from one network to the other. Now, the important bit here is it doesn't matter how that initial foothold or access is obtained, whether it's a phishing email, USB drop, just a vulnerability in some system, the lateral movement is always going to be the same. So what you do is just drop these canaries onto your different networks or environments. Attacker now gains that access, attempts the same repetitive process, but this time around, they'll bump into the canary, and that's when you get your high quality alert or signal, notifying you of the breach. Okay, so we'll generate a bunch of these alerts throughout the demo. This is just an example of one. What's important to mention here is once the canary has generated the alert, it's then over to you or someone else to respond to it. And we also won't bombard you with a bunch of alerts. There's multiple mechanisms built into the product to prevent alert fatigue, and we'll just cover one of those in the demo as well. Okay, so these canaries are honeypot pots. Sorry, I'm sure you folks are aware. It's not a new technology. It's been around for quite some time. They just haven't been deployed as widespread as they could, or just honeypots in general. And that's largely due to sort of other honeypots adding quite a bit of complexity and overhead onto networks. And from our perspective, we don't believe that's the right way to do it. We alleviate that operational overhead, and hopefully you'll see that in the demo as well. You will find similar vendors in the same space. They go for a much more complex model. In certain cases, they want you to become certified, set up deception teams, and the product takes quite a bit of administration, whereas we're really trying to simplify things as much as we can. So our idea is a quick deployment. As soon as that canary is on your network, it's valuable. You have this sort of honeypot there that can aid in detection, and there's little to no administrative overhead. And that's really our take there on sort of deception is just low friction honeypots that's going to send you a good quality signal when you need it. Okay, we'll move over to the first bit of the demo. So what we typically do is kind of split the view into two. So we have an attacker view on the right-hand side here. So it's just a terminal simulating a foothold, a finder file browser window, which will trigger some alerts with. And then on the left-hand side, is the management console, which is hosted in AWS. It's a SaaS-based application. It's a subscription, so we look after everything. You just deploy your canaries and they check in over here, and you administer them from here. Okay, so what we're looking at here is just this canary on my webcam with a green LED. So it's saying WAN router 01. So it's been set up to emulate the Cisco device. This other canary without the LED hasn't been deployed, so we'll deploy that. And then we're going to have a look at the Canary tokens as well. So starting off, we click on the Canary panel over here, just to grab the IP address. And we're just going to start off with a port scan, like an attacker would during that initial sort of reconnaissance phase of the attack. So trying to identify accessible or exploitable services. Okay, so immediately we get those alerts. I'm just opening up the bottom alert to give you an overview of the structure there. And here you'll see sort of description at the top, metadata like when this incident occurred, on which canary, as well as the attacker's IP address, and that's going to be remain the same regardless of the type of incident that's raised. And then this bottom section over here will have some event-specific information. In this case, we're seeing 5 ports, so that's the threshold for a port scan, just 5 SYN packets that hit the canary. When we generate more interesting alerts, we'll dig into this detail over here as well. Okay, shifting over to what the attacker sees, services you would expect on a Cisco device, SSH, Telnet, HTTP in this instance. MAC address has been modified to match that of Cisco, or the MAC OUI, or the vendor ID. And then a little bit further down, you can also see the operating system fingerprint now returns iOS 15.1 running on a Cisco router. This is all done in emulation. We're modifying certain components in the IP stack, TTL, window size, etc., whichever we have to, tricking the attacker into believing this is the real thing. Okay, so next step, we're just going to try and gain access here. So I'm just going to go with Telnet as an example. We get that prompt we'd typically expect on a Cisco device, and we attempt to authenticate over here. Immediately we get our alert. Again, description at the top, same metadata here. But now if we expand on the alert content, it gets a little bit more interesting. We now see those credentials that are entered into those prompts. The reason we do this is so that you can identify, whether you're dealing with compromised credentials. Small thing that I sort of touched on during that, just sort of during the slides, is the alert fatigue. You can see all 3 login attempts are rolled into a single incident. So if someone's going to brute force a canary, you're not going to get 1,000 alerts. It's going to get rolled or stacked like we're seeing over here. That's essentially what these canaries are all about. They really just look like the real device, and they behave like the real device. What we're going to do now is deploy this other canary on my desk. Before we get to that, let's just clear these alerts, keep it nice and neat and tidy throughout the demo. We've got this graph view as well, which we're kind of expanding on a little bit, so you can play around with that. So it's getting a bit of a facelift, but I'll just stick to the list view for now. Hit acknowledge, and once you hit acknowledge, then the alerts aren't gone; they go into this acknowledge state. So you can delete them entirely from your console if you like, or you can just go back to the default unacknowledged state. Okay, so let's go ahead and deploy this other canary over here. So for that, all I'm doing is just plugging in a USB cable here on the side of my desk. And for the hardware canaries, that's really all you need to do. It's just a USB cable for Ethernet, or USB cable for power, Ethernet cable for network connectivity. It's really meant to be super easy, plug and play. You'll see the LED going amber, and then as soon as it goes green, that's the deployment done. And how we do that is we would pre-enroll them. So they tie into a specific console. They can't check in anywhere else. We're able to ship them to wherever, multiple locations throughout the world. All you do is you plug it in, and as soon as it gets an IP on your network, that would be your deployment of your canary done. Okay, so this canary is being set up as a file share personality, a Windows file share. That's just the term that we're using for the profile or the emulation. I'll show you how you change that, how you customize that, and the options that we have there. But before we get to that, let's just enumerate and interact with this canary that we've just deployed. Okay, so just another port scan. You notice a new port scan that says consolidated network port scan. This occurs if we hit multiple canaries in a short enough period of time. So here you can see canary 1 on that port, canary 2 on that port. So this kind of indicates to you that the attacker is not enumerating one host at a time. They're sweeping across the network. They bump into multiple canaries, and that's a pretty valuable alert over there. Okay, then again, from the attacker's perspective, we're seeing services you would expect on a Windows machine: SMB share, RDP server, MAC address, Hewlett Packard, OS fingerprint, Windows Server 2016. Let's try interact with a service we haven't yet. So I'm just going to go with remote desktop. And as soon as we attempt to authenticate, we get our alert again. The source IP, try to RDP to the canary using the administrator username. Okay, so that kind of just demonstrates the deployment of a hardware canary. Let's go ahead and change it up to emulate something else. Clear my alerts again. And now what we're going to do is just sort of click on this canary panel over here. As soon as the alerts are cleared, click on your panel, go to this configure canary gear, and then you folks would see you get a single page, and that's deliberate to try and keep it nice and easy and simple. And we'll go through sort of 2 changes, just a quick personality change, and then thereafter we can go through a little bit of a more in-depth exercise going through the other configuration options that we have. So we're just going to start off with NAS. Go with let's say it's going into a data center, maybe VLAN 15. We select our personality. We'll go through this list in a bit. I'm just going to go with disk station NAS for now. As soon as you select that, immediately your IP stack and your MAC address is updated. We're going to leave this port scan detection enabled for now. You typically want that on. And then again, the other thing that now happens is some predefined options are selected for you. So, web server, NAS, SSH, FTP, as well as a Windows file share here. And this Windows file share, we're busy pushing out some updates. This has got a bit of some extra features to it now. You now can say system share, so it'll do things like hidden shares that you'd see on a Windows endpoint. So you can enable that. We used to be able to do one share. You can now do sort of multiple shares, so we can have documents and files, or whichever you're going to call that, files share. And there's also this new feature that you can say generate industry specific file tree. So you can go and say we're a gaming company, and then it's going to sort of generate a file share tree for you. So we can do. Let's just assume this is two different companies, just for the sake of having a look at what this does. We'll go. This is a clothing company, and then it's going to generate that patterns, research, etc. And then you can also click on this list here to add some miscellaneous departments. So it's just a bit of a facelift on the file share that you can experiment with. And that's all you need to do to change it up. I'm just going to go with hit deploy. And while we wait for that, we typically just cover how these canaries communicate back to the console, and all of the communication between the canaries and your console would be encrypted. And the alerts that we've been seeing, software updates. There's this last seen field over here. This represents a heartbeat packet that's encrypted as well. But the more interesting bit regarding the canaries is really the fact that they use DNS for their communication. So you drop them onto your network, point them towards your internal DNS server. As long as that DNS server is able to resolve an external domain, the canaries are going to be able to check back into this console. And that's really how we're able to deploy them as quickly as we can. Most networks just have working DNS, and we build sort of our communication channel on top of that. And the benefit of that as well is you don't have to open up firewall rules, configure proxies, any of that. It's really the deployment that we went through here just on the demo is what you would expect on your end as well. Just sort of plug and play, and there's your active honeypot. Okay, so the Canary is still booting up. Do we have any questions, folks, while we wait for it just to boot up? Nothing yet. That's perfectly fine. It should be up any second now, going amber, and then once it's green, we'll just have another scan, and we'll have a look at the web server as well as that file share that we deployed over there. Okay, so it's gone green. We now have a Synology NAS device. Copy the IP address, run another scan there. Okay, we see the services that were selected when we enabled the personality. So FTP, SSH, web server, file share, MAC address, Synology, OS fingerprint, Synology as well. So let's just have a look at the web and the file share interaction. So I'm just going to use sort of my attacker browser here, connect to the web interface, and you'll see, again, as soon as you attempt to authenticate, raises the alert, and we get that data in our alert data here. And then you also get the user agent, so you can see the tool or the browser that the attacker is using. Okay, let's have a look at that file share. Typically a good idea to drop some file share canaries just because they're a pretty attractive target from an attacker's perspective. So let's just have a look at what that looks like. And we can authenticate as either guest or registered. Guest is just, well, registered user would be for a domain join canary. We haven't done that, but I can show you how to do that as well. So let's just go with guest, and let's go to documents, and we see that sort of folder structure that we selected when we selected gaming. So we're seeing a bunch of gaming related sort of documents and file structure. So we open up one of these documents, or the attacker rather tries to open up one of these documents. They'll get this password protected prompt. As soon as my Excel just wakes up, should be any second. . There we go. So that's sort of the attacker's perspective. They can't crack that or anything like that. And then that raises the alert over here. We'll see it down here. Bug list, I authenticated as guest, and that's my IP address. And then if we go with the domain join Canary and someone authenticates with valid AD creds, you'll see domain user, well, the domain and then the user in that field. Again, with the intention of identifying, whether you're dealing with compromised credentials. Okay, so that's kind of just a quick change, and have a look at the new file share sort of features. Let's just have a go at some of the other functional features as well. So click on your Canary, go to the gear, and we'll select a base personality. There's about 50 of these. We keep adding. If there's something specific your folks would like to see, feel free to reach out to the folks at Securicore, and they can be in touch with us. You'll see, a bunch of Windows options, Windows Server, desktop. There's some Linux options. There's a Mac option, bunch of networking kit you have. Then in the vendor options, there's some interesting things, mainframes, and then a bunch of app servers. So some new things that we've added is SAP. We added SolarWinds, and there's Sophos as well, which has just been released very recently. And then some SCADA as well. Okay, so just for the sake of going through some of the other features, I go with Splunk, rename this to something more applicable, nothing honeypot or Canary, blend that into your current naming convention. If you like, you can play around with this fingerprint as well. So maybe you want to make it look like a more outdated device. I'm just going to stick to 2012. You can also modify the MAC address. So maybe you folks have physical Dell kit and you want your Canary to blend in. You can do that. For now, we'll leave the port scan detection disabled. Typically, we leave that on. And, it's you're not really expecting that behavior, so it becomes a high quality signal. But there might be an edge case where one particular Canary is in a really noisy network, and you want to avoid that. Then you can use this IP addressing standard, just DHCP or static. The important bit really is the providing a DNS server over there. I think there's been an enhancement to DOH as well. So typically, if you were using DOH instead of regular DNS, there wasn't authentication available for the pushing that over an HTTP proxy, but we've added authentication there if you want to use DOH instead of regular DNS. And now again, predefined services are selected. You can disable them, you can enable them. So it might mean that you choose a predefined personality, but you want to add an additional service or remove a service which is sort of on the predefined options, just to sort of match your environment. What you can do with all the services is modify the port. You can add a version to a banner. On the web server, you can enable SSL as well. You just have to upload a certificate and a key. And then there's also this option to upload your own files onto a web server, which gives you quite a bit of flexibility just within the web server itself. And then we'll just go and have a look at the other services available. The same thing counts here if you folks are interested in seeing another service that's not here, just bring the folks at Securicore. We do have this custom TCP service that gives you quite a bit of flexibility. So what I'm going to do is just say listen on port 25, and we'll make it appear like a mail server as an example. And then down here you can specify some data to return if there's an interaction with this listener as well. But I'll demonstrate how this behaves. What to choose from really, SQL Server I typically go with all the databases. You'll be able to sort of select the version, that file share we went through the new functionality. But in terms of joining to their main, you click on the button over here, and then you would just fill in your AD credentials. The Canary won't actively participate in any AD operation, but what it will do is sort of create a DNS record, computer object, SPN records. So if someone's enumerating Active Directory, they see this file share, they touch one of these files, we get the alert like we saw just a few moments ago. Okay, that's pretty much it. You can save these personalities if you like. I'm just going to go with deploy, and then we quickly just have a look at some of the, while we wait for this change, we can just have a look at some of the integration options that we offer, and then just cover different types of canaries that are also available to you folks. And there's maybe one or two that you aren't aware of at this point in time. So in terms of your alerts, multiple mechanisms for sending them out: email, SMS, native integrations for Teams, Splunk, Slack. There's an outbound webhook, syslog, TLS variants of syslog, and then the console also has a fully functional REST API. So we developed that before the front end. So everything you've seen me do and more, you can do. But in terms of an alert, it's really just going to be a query for your incidents that returns a JSON object. Okay, different types. So for sort of on-prem networks, there's virtual and hardware canaries. Hardware canaries are still very popular. They're the first ones we developed. Often send them to hard to reach places, or maybe where there's a location without any technical expertise. You can just get someone to plug in a network cable and USB. And then for cloud, AWS, GCP, Azure, all those canaries are the same in terms of functionality, just a different platform to which you deploy. And then there's Docker canaries as well. And then we recently added Tailscale canaries as well. They're currently in beta, but if you have a telnet and you want to talk about that, feel free to ask away. Okay, so what we'll do again is just wait for the changes. Then we'll go through some console functionality, and then we'll shift over to the tokens. So LEDs should be going from amber to green any second now again. Okay, looks like it's changed on here. Just waiting for the LED, and then we know we're good to go. Seems to be taking a little bit longer than what I expected. There we go. Run our scan again. This time around, the scans are not going to trigger the port scan alerts. We hadn't enabled that. We do see the custom listener, the modified port on the web server, added SSL, as well as modify the MAC address. So pretty easy to change them or customize them as well. I'm going to just telnet on port 25 to demonstrate that behavior. And then anything that would touch this listener will get logged inside the alert content over here. And that's the default behavior. We can modify that to only alert if a certain string is expected, or you can immediately kill this TCP connection as well. So maybe there's some proprietary service that you want to emulate on your network. You can kind of try and mimic exactly how that behave on your canary in terms of how the connection is handled. Okay, so that's the custom listener. Then let's just have a look at the changes on the web server. So we changed the port, which you'll be able to do on any of the services. We enabled SSL on this as well, so that makes it look a little bit more realistic. Add your certificate in there, and then this sort of page we're going to expect to behave the same way as the disk station as did alert a little bit earlier on. Okay, that's the canaries. Let's have a look at just some console functionality. Adding more, you folks would have seen, this is your modal with your licenses. Virtual deployment is just a VMX or an OVA that you deploy over there. And that's the new version 3.2.5. So if you see that, you can deploy that one. We're busy pushing out the updates. So how that works is typically we do the release for a new one. So if you go and redeploy, you get the new version, and then just you have to wait a short while before the updates are actually pushed to update, let's say from 3.4 to 3.5. Okay, Cloud Canaries, and that's sort of a similar process with all of these providers. What we do is we share an image with you, and that which is then that AMI. You click on launch, you'll be redirected to an AWS console. You authenticate. You kind of just follow the wizard, and that builds a Cloud Canary, and that's a similar process with any of those providers. And if you folks want to dig into anything specific, just jump in, ask away. Docker, so Docker, Kubernetes, and then Tailscale in beta, but folks are welcome to try that as well. Top right here, sort of global settings. This is sort of where all of the administration occurs. So email or SMS happens over here. You can get a summary. You can enable alerts for console changes. So we're going to make a change now, so we'll get an alert. That's an alert if something changes to a canary. The API is available over here. It's a bit of changed up how the APIs work as well. So you can do sort of read-only API keys instead of just the global API key. All the documentation is available here. The API becomes useful when you start thinking about automating and scaling Canary tokens. And if you folks are in that stage of a deployment where your canaries have been deployed and you want to go to the sort of next step of sprinkling tokens wherever or over rather, reach out to the folks at Securicore and they'll make it happen for you. Webhooks, Teams, Splunk, Slack, generic. It's used for things like Sentinel, Discord. There's a couple other use cases for that as well. What else do we have here? Canary Tokens, custom domain. So it's not new, but it's something worth mentioning. Just a couple of DNS changes, and then you change the domain to which Canary Tokens communicate to. And that will make sense once we go through Canary Tokens, but definitely something worth having a look at. Just enhances your deployment. Ignored IPs and ports, and this is important. Volume scanners, asset management tools, anything like that would go in there. We only want to get high quality signals from our canaries and avoid any false positives. And then single sign-on is also supported. So it's just a SAML integration over there. Okay, that's really all there is in terms of management. We're going to go through the tokens next. But before we jump into that, let's just check if there's any other questions, folks, or any questions, Canary console questions. Now's a good time. I see there's been some questions on the side. What's the difference between hardware and online version? Cool. Chanti's answered that one. They're the same. That's good. How do we install the software version? So I can show you that as well. I can show you a VM deployment. I can show you an Azure deployment as well for a second. Okay, so there's the guides. Great stuff. Thanks, John T. One piece of hardware, one canary. Yep. Okay, John T has knocked the questions out of the box. Thanks for that. I think we have some time. So let me quickly just show you how we would go about doing a virtual. And then if you want to see a different type of canary, let me know and I can probably get it done for you. So I have just a lab VMware server here, and just log in over here. So I've gone, so you would go to adding Canary over here and then downloading the VMX or the OVA. I have this image already downloaded on this machine that I'm demoing from, just to save up that process. So on the desktop, you can see virtual Canary OVA. So let's just go and go create Canary, and create from OVA, and we're going to say, this is a database that we're emulating. And I'm going to select the file on the desktop. I'm going to go next. And that's just one data store. I'm going to say going to work network power on automatically, hit next, hit finish. And the thing that's going to take the longest now is really just copying this OVA over from my machine to this ESXi host. And then once that's up, it's a quick boot, and we'll check them in. We'll check in over the console over here as well. So let's just click on it over here. Looks like it's powering on. As soon as it's powered on, I'll open up this console and you can kind of see the boot process as well. Looks like it's changing up. Okay, so you get that sort of canary splash screen and it reboots. And then once that reboot is done, it's going to check into this console. You'll see once it's booted up, it has this sort of canary splash screen where you can do some config. There we go, add canary. And yeah, you can log in with a credential specified on the console, and you can set up things like IP addressing. And if you prefer to not have the splash screen, you just want it to be a black screen, and there's features for that as well within this management console. But that's what you would do in terms of a virtual deployment. Also pretty straightforward. If we hit refresh, we'll see, okay, it's just checking in. So it's going to take about 30 seconds, and then it checks in, and then it has the same functionality. There we go. So if we go to configure, then you folks see it's exactly the same thing, just on a virtual platform. And that would be the same for AWS, Azure, and GCP as well. Let's have a look at the tokens. So we'll follow the same structure, just a couple slides as an intro, and then we'll move through the console here and show you what they're about. Okay, so in terms of the canaries, They look like an entire system. You make it set up like a file share, a Linux database, or whichever is applicable in the network where it's being deployed into. Whereas these Canary tokens are little documents, credentials, or objects that you can place onto existing infrastructure. So existing desktops, existing servers, or maybe you have an application that you want to protect, a code repository or a password vault. There's going to be a method to embed a Canary token in there as well. And the nice thing about the tokens is it doesn't matter where whether the token's executed on the endpoint where it's placed or exfiltrated and opened up, you're still going to get an alert from your Canary token. So one of the examples that will explain this that we'll go through is creating a word Canary token. Here we're placing it on an executive's machine, so a high-value target. The attacker compromises that machine, exfiltrates the document, opens it up a week later, and we still get our alert on our console. But you'll notice, the data within the alert meta or the alert metadata differs slightly. There's this token memo field. It says CEO's desktop. It's something that we would configure, and it's important to configure that as descriptively as you can, because you'll take a note that source IP is a public address. So it's not something that we have access to anymore, but the memo says document that we had initially placed onto the CEO's machine has been accessed. That's where we're going to start our investigation for the malicious behavior. Okay, two methods of deploying tokens manually on the console, and I'll walk through that. And then there's also a method to deploy this in an automated fashion. And that's where you want to end up. You get your canaries deployed, then move over to tokens, and then you can shift over to sort of automated deployment. There's an unlimited amount of tokens that can be deployed, so they can really be used to extend the detection capability by quite a bit. And that's the idea: sprinkle them on file shares, cloud environments, emails, chat logs, high-value targets. There's a bunch of sort of example scripts on our GitHub page, and we could easily assist with tailoring and writing up scripts and things like that as well. But what you would do is you would take one of those scripts and you execute it with your existing endpoint management tool. So if you're using something like SCCM, Jamf, Ansible, whichever, you target a group of endpoints, fire a script, and that would effectively drop a token on them. Okay, here's some of the tokens that we offer. A bunch of document and email related tokens. There's a clone site token that's popular as well. That's just some JavaScript we embed into a login page. And then once that page is cloned and brought up on a different domain, you'll be notified. So some phishing detection there. The tokens I like recommending: AWS, Slack API, WireGuard VPN. They're not tied to any of your infrastructure at all. So regardless of whether you're using AWS, Slack, or WireGuard, you can use those tokens. And the reason I like recommending them is because they take an extra step to actually trigger the alert. The attacker needs to install the WireGuard client, or they need to install the WireGuard CLI or the AWS CLI, rather, excuse me. And that's not behavior that you're expecting from a regular user. So once those tokens trigger, it's a pretty good signal of malicious behavior. Okay, let's shift over to the console and create some tokens. Okay, so we're going to start off with the webbug and the DNS token. Then I'll go through the AWS and the Word document as well. I'll verbally go through some other ones. We still have plenty of time, so if there's anything specific, I'll go through the list, and if there's anything specific anyone wants to see, we can cover that as well. Jump to maybe just let me know if someone says anything that you want me to cover as well. I don't
Hi,
know.
Tyrone. Then, sorry,
Yeah.
there is one question from Danny. If you can address that, please.
Yeah, let me just find it. Danny, is there support for Azure AD or SharePoint Online personality? So there isn't an Azure AD personality. There's a normal Active Directory personality that you can deploy into your sort of Azure environment, or you could simply go and just deploy a file share within your Azure sort of VNet. And if you're not using any VMs within cloud, you're only using services, that's not knowledge that an attacker has. They're still going to enumerate the entire environment if they see something attractive that gives you your alert. There is a SharePoint personality, and then there's also going to be ways to embed tokens into SharePoint as well, depending on whether you're using it the way that you're using SharePoint, but you're going to be able to drop tokens in SharePoint as well. Token, do we put I see there's another one from Paul. Oh, sorry, Danny. Did you want to say something there? I'm just kind of rambling on.
No. I was just saying thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Okay, Paul, tokens do we put on one computer? Yeah, that's a good question, but that's the way you're going to do it. It's going to be one per computer. So the tokens, you'll see they give you a reminder that the location where we've dropped this thing has been accessed, whereas the canaries are going to give you private IP address, username, password, machine name. You're not going to get the same level of telemetry from a token, but it's still, you get an unlimited amount, sprinkle them all over. And if you use the sort of the automated way of deploying them, they take care of setting this. This is the token on the CEO's desktop, the CFO's desktop, the CTO's desktop. It can kind of automatically populate those values for you. But yes, one per location or one point is the way to go. So only if that specific file is stolen and open is notified. Yes, so that's the way it works. And then you can also drop the Canary tokens on top of the file share, which gives you 2 steps of alerts. So what that would do is someone connects to the file share, we get that alert like we saw a little bit earlier on, they exfiltrate the document, and then they open it up, from an external network, it gives you another alert. So there's some benefit in kind of combining the two as well. And then another option is also to take a singular canary and kind of map it onto various endpoints, and that can contain a canary token as well. So there's some options that you have. Okay, tokens. We're starting off with a WebHug and the DNS token. They're kind of just the primitive types. So you can think of them as the building blocks. You can use them, on their own. Typically, folks start off with a Word document, an API key, and branch out thereafter. The reason why we demo these two up front is just to explain how these tokens work. So they've been embedded in the other tokens for you. So when I go WebHug, I'm just going to go with web test, hit create. This produces a URL. So this URL is typically embedded somewhere else. And then when something or someone connects to this embedded URL, that's just going to create or perform an HTTP request. As soon as that lands on the console, there's an alert saying, I'm in South Africa based on the IP address. We added this not too long ago. You can kind of do a geo or a gray noise lookup on that just to see if it's a sort of a known bad IP. And then there's some JavaScript that would also run in the browser saying, I'm using Google Chrome and this is a MacBook. So that's your one trigger for a Canary token would be HTTP based. The other ones would be DNS based. So if I say sort of DNS test, hit create, you're going to see this just produces a hostname again, and we can modify this as well under the global settings pane to a different hostname. Copy this off, this is embedded elsewhere, and then when something tries to resolve this hostname, that's the trigger. So that's kind of under the hood, the nuts and the bolts of these tokens. They perform that either the HTTP or the DNS request, and you're going to see this is exactly what happens with the CEO's desktop document. We can upload our own documents. I'm just going to go with create. You can always just modify the content of the document afterwards as well. So that drops into the downloads folder there. We can rename that to something a little bit more attractive. We can add some attractive enticing information inside here as well. Open that up. Or the attacker opens that up, rather, we get the alert saying document that we placed on that location has been accessed, and now we have to go investigate that endpoint. Expanding here, we're going to see token communicated DNS, HTTP, those two sort of initial tokens that we covered. But again, now we're not seeing private IP addresses, usernames, passwords, anything like that you would get from an actual Canary. Okay. Let's just go with the AWS API key as well. This is the most popular token. Again, not tied to your folks' infrastructure, just lives on our backend. I hit create, produces a valid API key. So from an attacker's perspective, it's a pretty good, or it's a pretty attractive sort of token. It's credentials. They can potentially gain access to an entire AWS account. So it's something that they kind of have to try it. And we call this process that I've sort of not deliberately, but what I've done here is embedding a token into another token. We call that stacking. There's multiple benefits to doing this. So the the tokens trigger based on the underlying application. So if we open up this Word document with Notepad, it's not going to trigger. Or if you open up this Word document in, on an endpoint without internet connectivity, it can't reach out to this console. But what we've done here is we've, added a token in here that's internet facing. So we kind of coerce the attacker into, regardless if they open this with another application or they open it up without internet connectivity, it coerces them into touching this internet facing resource. I can show you a little bit more of a pretty example. You can ignore CrowdStrike for now. That was kind of just the method of deploying the tokens. But you can come up with these sort of stories like this, gaining access to your AWS account, add the externally facing token, and then you get 2 steps of detection, which is kind of the stacking thing that I tried to explain now. Okay, that's your AWS API key. Let's go through some other ones. Azure login certificate, that's kind of the equivalent to the AWS API key. Multiple document types that you get here. There's a sensitive command token. It's just some, it's just a registry key that you would import, and then you could watch for things like who am I, or ipconfig, or whichever an attacker is going to run that you would find interesting. So that could go into your existing domain controller as an example. WireGuard VPN config file, clone website, QR codes, documents, more API keys. And if you scroll a little bit down, you'll see sort of mail bugs and some tokens for G Suite. Okay, folks, I've got 1 or 2 more slides just to cover. We've still got plenty of time left. We'll check the questions. If there's anything else you want me to go through, I'm sure we could do that as well. So these last slides, just mentioned we've got Canaries deployed on all 7 continents. It's just a little bit of a fun fact that we like to say that we've got birds deployed on Antarctica. If you have time, you can also check out this canary.love site, and there you're going to just find folks saying nice things. Products easy to work with, we're easy to work with, that sort of comments what you'll find. But that's us. If you need anything, reach out to the folks at Securicore. They'll ping us, and we'll gladly assist and get anything working for you. But that's me. If there's questions, let me check. Tokens are very cool. So for the Word doc, not every document on the computer, it's just the document you create. Yes. So you could tokenize every document, but that's gonna become rather loud. So 1, maybe 2 per endpoint. So by naming it a high target value, you increase the chance of that. Yes. So we're going to call it salaries.xls or financials, credit card data. We kind of want to make it look like an attractive target. And so a Word document is a good example on your executives' machines that says salaries or something like that. Okay, Chanti's got that one. Can you create all the tokens at once? I'm sure you would. Typically, you could with the API. Typically, folks would start off with maybe the documents and the API keys, but you're more than welcome to create as many as you like. And everything I've done here, we can do programmatically through the API as well. So you can reach out to John T. He'll help with that too. And there's some scripts. We have a multi-dropper script that comes to mind that does something like that can do multiple at once.